Uh, we're we're delighted to have each of you with us this evening. Let me just say a few words about Voices for Justice in Palestine in case you're not familiar with us and the work that we do. Voices for Justice in Palestine is a nonpartisan social justice nonprofit working for a just and lasting peace in historic Palestine. We are diverse and interfaith, working statewide with like-minded partners, connecting struggles for liberation and human rights. We stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. We support their quest for to live dignified lives free of colonization, occupation, and state violence in their historic homeland, and to enjoy all the same rights as Israeli Jews in complete and equal measure. Our work is community education and advocacy and media presence. You can find our website online. Visit us also on Instagram and Facebook. We are active on WhatsApp. We publish a weekly newsletter to 2,000 of our readers throughout the state and across the nation. Let us know if you would like to receive it. We welcome your financial support for our work. Opportunities to donate can be found at our website. Tonight, we kick off our 2025 webinar series, and we are excited to have Matt Ho with us tonight for a conversation about the coming year for Palestine. Tonight's webinar is co-sponsored by Veterans for Peace and North Carolina Peace Action. Before I introduce Matt and we get started, I'd like to invite representatives from our three sponsoring organizations to bring us greetings and a word of welcome. First up is the chair of the board for Voices for Justice in Palestine, Dr. Burhan Ghanayem. Burhan.
I want to thank you, Mark, and thank you, Matt, for joining us. Thank you, Kate, for doing a lot of the legwork for us. Thanks everybody who is joining us today. Yes, I am the chairman of the board of Voices for Justice in Palestine. We are excited and happy that we have you here this night we are holding our breath for the ceasefire to go through and a relief for the millions of people in Gaza who are suffering this cold weather and hunger and starvation. So I wanted to welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us. Please, as Mark said, go to Facebook, Instagram, our website, get our newsletter, and get engaged with us. This organization, we are actually statewide and national, and our membership growing, and we want you to be with us. Thank you all very much. Thank you for our co-sponsors, and I appreciate every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Burhan. And now for representing the Veterans for Peace, the Doug Ryder. Doug, please. You're still muted, Doug. Doug, we're not hearing you. You're still muted, I think.
Mark, I don't see Doug in the gallery. Are you sure he's even here?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, here he is, upper right-hand corner. Yeah.
My apologies. My deepest thanks to Mark for organizing this webinar, to my brother Matt for stepping into the belly of the beast, bringing us his insights and observations. I also honor everyone for showing up tonight. May this virtual container we share hold all of our grief in a loving and compassionate way. Many of you know about Veterans for Peace. We're a global organization of military veterans and allies whose collective efforts are to build a culture of peace by using our experiences and lifting our voices. We inform the public of the true causes of war and the enormous costs of war, with an obligation to heal the wounds of war, to end all wars. Our challenge today is finding and holding on to hope amid uncertainty, conflict, and loss. Dr. King reminds us we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. O Mitakuyasin, all my relations.
Thank you so much, Doug. Let's also hear from Joe Cicero representing North Carolina Peace Action. Joe? I don't know if I see you on the screen. Are you there, Joe Cicero? All right. Well, Joe will join us a little bit later. North Carolina Peace Action, everyone should know, awarded Matt their Peacemaker Award in 2023. And they were really excited to join us in co-sponsoring his presentation with us tonight. So let me introduce now Kate Newman, our intern, who's at the controls tonight and has a few words for us about the tech side of tonight's webinar. Kate.
Hi. First, just a quick note that this will be recorded. So if you would prefer to turn your camera off, feel free to do so. Please do stay muted until we open it up for questions at the end of Matt's talk. If you would like a copy of the recording, just email voicesforjusticeinpalestine@gmail.com and we can send you a copy. We're also going to post it onto our YouTube channel, which you can find either through our weekly newsletter. It's linked at the bottom, or again, you can reach out to us and ask for that link. But we would love to have you follow us on there, as well as our Instagram and Facebook. Again, when Matt is finished speaking, Mark is going to open the floor up for questions. Please hold your questions until the end, at which point you can raise your hands. We're going to have people ask questions in person versus via the chat. We just find that it runs smoother and is a little more personal that way. So please let us know in the chat if you have any questions, but in about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, I'm going to close the chat until Matt's done speaking. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kate. So it's my honor to introduce Matt to you. Matt's known to many of us in the area, but I wanted to just give you a brief sense of who Matt is and some of the work that he does. Matthew Ho is the Associate Director of the Eisenhower Media Network, an organization of expert former military, intelligence, and civilian national security officials who seek to reach broad, cross-partisan audiences in diverse media outlets and among the American people who increasingly sense that U.S. foreign policy today is not making them or the world safer. Matt is a former Marine Corps captain, an Afghanistan State Department officer, and a disabled Iraq War veteran. In 2009, Matt resigned his post with the State Department in Afghanistan after the escalation of the war by the United States. Matt serves on the advisory boards of many peace organizations, including Veterans for Peace and World Beyond War, and is an associate member of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. So, Matt, welcome. We are delighted to have you with us. We know that you traveled to the occupied West Bank in the fall of 2024 with Sabeel, the Center for Palestinian Liberation Theology, a group that many of us know well and hold in high regard. I traveled throughout Palestine with them in 2013, and many of us have had the privilege of traveling with them. Palestinians often say, come and see, then go and tell. Could you tell us then about your experiences on this trip, where you went, the activists you talked with, the things you learned, and as promised, your insights into the coming year for Palestine. We're also eager to hear your geopolitical analysis of Israel's recent incursions into Lebanon and Syria, and your take on the ceasefire deal. Matt, welcome, and please begin. Glad to have you.
All right, thanks, Mark. I appreciate JVP and VFP and Peace Action for putting this together, and for all you who are watching. Some of you here in the Triangle, and others, as I look through the list of folks who are here from all over the place. So I appreciate that. And one thing, I did see one person in there. I'm going to take the liberty, since I've got the mic now. Nadia Lee is with us, and Nadia Lee is with NC Pally. And Nadia, if you could put in the chat, please, when you get the opportunity, I guess maybe when Kate opens the chat back up, about your event on January 25th. So on Saturday, January 25th, the evening of that Saturday, there'll be the inaugural Roots of Resistance banquet. And it will be a night to get together in solidarity with one another in person, share food, and be there in vigil for Palestine. And so, if Nadia, if you could please share that information with people in the chat. Also, too, before we begin, because I'll forget to make these recommendations with regards to the ceasefire, two best things that I could recommend people. If you want to get up to speed on it, read Chris Hedges' essay from today called "The Ceasefire Charade," and then watch Democracy Now! From this morning with Daniel Levy, Mohammed Shahadad, and Jeremy Scahill. Those, I think, are the three best analysis, or two best, excuse me, analysis of what we're going through right now as we watch this ceasefire. As Mark said, I was in Palestine back in November with Sabeel. I was there for 8 days. We were primarily in the West Bank. We did get down to the Gaza border afterwards. I could talk about what that was like, viewing Gaza from the outside, the horror of that, the absurdity of it, everything that comes with it. Excuse me. In the West Bank, though, where we were most of the time, we were in Bethlehem, we were in Hebron, we were in Jerusalem, we were in Nablus, we were in Ramallah. We were not able to get to any of the smaller villages and towns that we tried to get to because the Israelis kept closing the roads off, which we can get to also later about what life is like there for the Palestinian people and the strangulation of the occupation. We met with, in those 8 days, very full 8 days, morning to night, meeting with people of all sorts, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Palestinians, Israelis, internationals, Israeli army soldiers, survivors of October 7th, rabbis, imams, priests, activists, journalists, lawyers, former prisoners, families of those detained and those killed, people whose houses have been demolished. We came away with a very good understanding of what was occurring there in the West Bank, and as I'll get to later, what I believe will be occurring over this coming year. I have some slides, and I was telling Mark and Kate and Burhan earlier, my first draft of this was about 35 slides long. So everyone should feel relieved that I cut it down substantially. I had a really great photo of a cat sitting in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The purpose of that being to explain, look, this cat can come in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Me, a foreigner, a guy who's 5 or 6 days of the week an atheist, he can go in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but the vast, vast majority of the Palestinians will never be able to set foot in the Al-Aqsa Mosque unless something changes, right? So I left a lot of those things out that because too broad and don't have the time to get into all the various ways you can see how the occupation affects people, how the apartheid affects people, how that subjugation affects people, and what that's doing to them as well. Again, what foretells to come. So let me share my screen because I do want to focus on the people I met. As Mark said, come and see, go and tell. And I feel, an obligation to share the stories of those I met. And forgive me because this will be difficult. This will be hard, but it's what needs to be shared. So, okay. All right. So everyone can see Anthony Bourdain. So I chose this Anthony Bourdain quote for two reasons. The first being that in 2013, Anthony Bourdain, if you're not familiar with Anthony Bourdain, late celebrity chef, had a program on CNN, among other things, called Parts Unknown. He'd go around the world and he'd do these really great shows, investigating the culinary aspects of other cultures. And he did one in 2013 from Gaza. And it was, I don't think it's too far gone to say it was revolutionary when he did this. I don't think anything had been shown on American television, particularly on CNN, that exposed what was going on in Gaza as Bourdain's cooking show episode of Parts Unknown. And at that point, Bourdain, who spoke consistently afterwards about the plight of what was happening to the Palestinians, the crime that was being committed against them, he spoke very clearly about how he went there and his eyes were open. And one of the things he said was this: the world has visited many terrible things on the Palestinian people, none more shameful than robbing them of their basic humanity. And that's what I'm going to go through in these slides coming up. But I also want to bring up again this episode because I believe it is available on HBO. And if it's a good starting point for maybe friends and relatives who don't have the context, even 15, 16 months in this genocide, don't have the context of what was preceding October 7th of 2023. So I think that might be, like I said, a good thing for people to have other people watch. So this is, again, about the people, about telling their stories. Some of what I'll do tonight is talk geopolitics. That's what I do for a living. But geopolitics in themselves are meaningless. It's about the people. Perhaps in Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv, it's not about the people. But certainly for us, those gathered here tonight, it is about the people. This is why we care about it. This is why we work on it. This is why we advocate for people. So you see this poster. This was a poster, and there are many other ones similar like this all through Ramallah. Ramallah, the third largest city in the West Bank. It's the capital of Palestine, if you will, if you want to call it that. The capital, I mean, not Palestine. But this public information campaign, essentially saying, can you hear us? Because even among the Palestinians, the need to constantly remind them to tell the story. Don't let what's happening in Gaza not be told, right? And certainly for the Palestinians in the West Bank, their brothers and sisters enduring the genocide in Gaza, at the same time, too, enduring the stepped up occupation that is moving inexorably and without constraint or obstacle towards annexation by Israel. But you saw these throughout Ramallah, these types of posters, this public information campaign, because even there, the idea of continuing to speak is hard. It's difficult. It's not because they don't want to, but it is. It's difficult and it's hard. So the first person I want to introduce is Lulu Nasir. And I met Lulu in Ramallah. And her daughter at the time was being held in prison by the Israeli authorities, by the Israeli army. And she was under what's called administrative detention. If people are not familiar with administrative detention, that essentially is the Israelis can take you and put you in prison without explanation, not even evidence, without explanation of what they're doing. And there are approximately 6,000 to 7,000 Israelis that we know of, and I'll get to that in a moment, what we actually know, that we know of that are in this administrative detention. What occurred with her daughter, Leanne, who is a 24-year-old college student living at home. The Israelis came to their home at night. They put rifles in the family's faces. They told they told Lulu if she said another word, they were going to shoot her. And they took their daughter away, and that was the last they saw of Leanne until December when she was released. This was in November, so at this point, they had not seen Leanne, they did not know of her, and the pain that was in her eyes, having a mother, that experience of someone who has been betrayed by everything, what she's going through, and knowing that the Israelis deliberately and systemically torture in prison. This is not my statement. This is what Israel's own human rights organization, but B'Tselem, has said. This is what Amnesty International said. This is what the Israeli press and international press have said. This is what the Palestinians have said when they've gotten out of those detention centers or those torture prisons, that it's a systemic, deliberate process of torture. And so to be there with a mother whose daughter was enduring that, you can imagine. And then that's replicated throughout the West Bank. So that at this point, when I was there, the number was 12,000 detainees, Palestinian detainees, not including those from Gaza, just in the West Bank alone. And what I'm going to focus on here tonight, I should have said up front, is the West Bank, and certainly Gaza is own separate issue. The genocide there, of course, is undescribable, untouchable, unimaginable. But tonight we'll just focus on the West Bank and touch on Gaza from time to time, of course. But so 12,000 detainees. Well, we've recently learned in the last week, because a letter from the head of the Shin Bet being the roughly the Israeli equivalent of the FBI, Ronen Bar, to the Israeli government, to the Israeli cabinet, is that they're actually holding 21,000 Palestinians. So not 9,000 more than we were aware of. How many of those are under administrative detention where there are no charges, no explanation? We don't know. I'll get to in a moment about some of the charges that actually can be offered to be held these people while there. But in the sense of Lulu's story, Leanne's story, it is happening. There's Leanne. She was released in December. But again, there's 21,000 who are still in that detention, enduring, again, deliberate and systemic torture, very often sexual violence. I'll touch on that again in a bit. So that is one aspect of how the Israelis control the population by putting the fear into the parents, right? And when I was there in 2017 and saw this again this time, but in 2017, the villages we went to, the towns we went to, their parents lived in terror because the Israelis would come at night and take their children. And they only had to do it once a year or twice a year in each village. Take one family's kid, take their 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, hold them for 24 hours, 48 hours, smack them around, make them sign some confession in Hebrew, but can you imagine what that does to parents? And you saw that fear, you saw that pain, that terror in the eyes everywhere you went about the Israelis coming in at night and taking their children. And it was something that is an effective policy of the Israelis in terms of terrorizing the population to try to get them to submit. And you're seeing, unfortunately, the exhaustion of the Palestinian people, the fear. I'm going to get to this in a little bit too, but the fear, the overwhelming dread, and then the constant how hard it is, and to the point that Burhan and I were talking about this before we came on. But when I was there in 2017, I didn't run across many Palestinians who spoke about leaving. And this time around, I spoke to many Palestinians who spoke about leaving, particularly if they have family, particularly if they had children. The idea of what they're enduring now and what they believe to be coming means they need to get out. This next photo here is in Nablus, and these are with college students. They attend An-Najah University, the largest Palestinian university, 22,000 students. And we went up there, and these kids, they want to talk to him. Some of them had never met anyone who wasn't Palestinian or Israeli. And so we were kind of like celebrities showing up, and they wanted to talk to us, and they were so grateful we had shown up. And they talked to you at first as any 20, 21, 22-year-olds talk about their future and their hopes. And I'm graduating, and I got this degree, and I hope to do this. That only lasts so long before the reality comes out. And so you see the young man who I have my arm around there with the glasses. Both his father and his brother have been arrested by the Israelis, held in prison for nearly 3 years, tortured for no one knows. Something about paperwork not being done right or correct with their business, right? But they were able to do that. All of them spoke of the Israeli army raids that were occurring in Nablus every night. They spoke about the checkpoints, and they spoke about friends who have been arrested by the Israelis. Now, they said friends. So this is a university of 22,000. And these kids in particular have brought the story to us. They talked about their 4 friends, 4 boys. And it wasn't as if they were talking about 4 other kids at college in this massive 22,000 person school and they heard about them. No, they were talking about their friends. So you can imagine if it's in this group, this subset of those students, they know 4, then you have to imagine throughout the rest of the university, it's pervasive. And what did these 4 boys do? Well, they liked things and commented on things on Instagram about Gaza. And for that, at this point, they have been in Israeli detention for 4 months. And so that type of life they are leaving. They have another friend that they spoke of who had been shot dead at a checkpoint a month or so before we met with them. That's the reality for them. That even their phones, they don't even have the relief of kids in our country of being able to go on their phones and just get that escapism or whatever. Even their phones are surveilled. If they like the wrong thing, they can end up in Ofer prison. So it's this type of they smile, they're enthusiastic, they're excited to meet you, they want to talk to you about their future, but after a bit of time, they can't talk about anything other than the reality that they're enduring. And these kids, look at them. Why shouldn't they have everything, right? Why shouldn't these kids have everything? And this is what life under occupation is like for them. The best for them would be to get out, right? And live in Europe, live in Saudi Arabia or Qatar or someplace like that. But they don't want to do that because this is where their families are. This is where their home is. And why should they? They should have everything they want in the homes where they live. This next photo is actually the reason why I cut so much of, look, here's a green bus, here's a blue bus. Green buses are what the Palestinians ride on. The blue buses are what the Israelis ride on. There you go. There's apartheid. That's why I cut a lot of that out because of this couple here. Excuse me. This is Fakhri Abu Diab and his wife Amna. They are living in a neighborhood of Jerusalem called Silwan. And earlier this year, the home that Fakhri had been born in, grew up in, raised his family in, where his children and grandchildren lived with him, was destroyed by the Israelis. They tried to rebuild it again. It was destroyed, and now they are living in a trailer next to the rubble of their home. I actually have a piece of their home here in my hand. This is another aspect besides the detentions. What do? What do the Israelis do? They demolish the homes. They demolish the structures. They make life unlivable, right? They put that fear that your neighborhood might be next. And you've seen, particularly since October 7th, a massive increase in demolition orders by the Israelis. And just in the last couple of months, we've seen the Israeli militaries bypass the courts. So at least there was this game, if you will, that the Palestinians could go to court and maybe prevent their homes being demolished or their schools being demolished or their businesses being demolished. Now the Israeli army is just bypassing the court. But we saw in, since October 7th, a 400% increase in home demolition orders. And this has been something that Israel has done consistently. This is part of ethnic cleansing, right? If you take away where they can live, if you destroy their homes, they have to go someplace else. That's the thought behind it. And since, these are numbers from the Israeli Committee Against Housing Demolition, since 1948, more than 175 structures have been destroyed, leveled, rubbled, whatever you want to call it, in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as well as in the Negev. And in the last year, in 2024, 1,400 Palestinian structures were destroyed by the Israeli army. About the same amount the previous year in 2023. And that's in the West Bank. And if you go down to the Negev, where the Bedouin are, just last year alone, the Israelis destroyed 4,000 structures. People may be familiar with this. With the Bedouin, they keep rebuilding. And the Israelis destroy what are, hardened tents essentially, and the Bedouin put them back up, right? And it's this defiance. And just today, I was watching a piece on Al Jazeera about the homes in Gaza. And as many of you know, the vast mass destruction, 70% of structures have been destroyed in Gaza, right? Destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. And if you are actually, that's northern Gaza, but it's very similar in the central and southern parts as well. And there's a piece on Al Jazeera today where the defiance, people rebuilding out of the rubble, people trying to scavenge, not just scavenge, but to resurrect what they have. And then again, that defiance, we will not leave. And that's what you see with the Palestinians over and over again. It gets back to this idea of what's called samud, the steadfastness, right? That's probably, I think people would say, the most famous characteristic of the Palestinians is their steadfastness, the samud. But it's breaking. The force of the occupation, the the isolation of the Palestinians as well, and something I'll get to in a bit or at the end about what people can do, is having this effect where people are struggling. And Fakhri and his wife Amna were the case. They're defiant. They're not going anywhere. But when you talk to them, they are hurting and they're tired and they're exhausted and they live in perpetual fear. The soldiers and the settlers come anytime they want. We were there in mid-November. The settlers and the soldiers had come on the night of the American election. So the night of the American election, they destroyed 7 homes in Fakhri Amna's neighborhood there in Silwan. So far, in 2024, 15 homes have been destroyed in Silwan. 7 of them, again, on the night of the American election. And in this case, where Fakhri and Amna are in their trailer next to the rubble of the home where he was born and grew up and where they raised their family, and their family is still living with them. All their family is now scattered, of course. They still live in this trailer. The Israeli settlers and the army, they come, right? And they beat him up. They take him away. You know, on top of all that, when you have your home demolished, you get a $10,000 bill. You've got to pay for your home's demolition. And if you don't pay, well, then they'll take you back to prison, as well as they'll seize your bank accounts. I mean, so the insidiousness here, right? The malevolence, what's being done to these people, not just in terms of physically taking away their family, physically taking away their homes, but the psychological pressure that the occupation puts on them is enormous, absolutely enormous. And then there's things that happen like this. Next slide. Oops, I'm sorry. This is what their home looks like. And it was nighttime when we visited them, so maybe not the best photo. But this photo here, the gentleman sitting on their couch, and I was sitting exactly where he was sitting. That gentleman, his name is Hans Wexel. And Hans Wexel is at the U.S. Embassy, he's in charge of Palestinian affairs. And I kept this in the slideshow for 2 reasons. Because people like Fakhri Amna, they have people show up, these diplomats, representatives from NGOs, whoever, and they say they're going to do something. Now, of course, the Americans are never going to do anything, but you see the type of person this is, this diplomat who'd be willing to go into somebody's home, tell them he was going to help them, and then watch as, right, their home has been destroyed, the trailer they live in is going to be destroyed next, right? This is the type of people who give that type of false hope, who are willing to go and lie to people as they suffer, right? This is what populates the staff of the American embassy in Israel. And one thing about Wexel, a point to show just the overall American government's attitude towards the Palestinians. If you look at Wexel's 2 previous postings before he went to the embassy to, again, become the head of Palestinian affairs for the U.S. government in Israel and Palestine, Wexel's 2 previous postings with the State Department were as the State Department representative to Central Command, right? So the U.S. military warfighting command for the Middle East. And prior to that, he was the State Department's director of counterterrorism. That's the man they sent to be in charge of Palestinian affairs, right? A man who comes from counterterrorism, who comes from working with a military that has killed more than 1 million people in the Middle East. That's who they feel should be the person in charge of the Palestinians. If you see that, if you understand that, you understand entirely the American mindset, the American government's mindset towards the Palestinian people. Okay, this is in Hebron. To your right, my left is Omar with Sabeel. Yeah, and on my right is Isa Amro. Many of you are probably familiar with Isa. Isa actually just won the Right Livelihood Award. Activist in Hebron. He runs an organization called Youth Against Settlements. One of the things that saw when I was there in 2017 with Veterans for Peace. This delegation I went on was a solidarity delegation, of course. Our purposes were to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people and to learn about the liberation efforts that are going on there. In 2017 with Veterans for Peace, it was a solidarity mission, but it was to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian resistance, with the nonviolent Palestinian resistance. So we met many Palestinian resistance leaders throughout the West Bank, and many of them have been broken. If people know some and want to know, you can certainly message me or email offline. I'll talk to you directly about them, because some of those that we know have been broken, that the Israelis broke them through the torture, through the sexual assault, through the threats against their family. They broke these men. Issa's not broken. His family, and I share this because Issa shared it with us, and I believe Issa wants us to understand what is happening there. Issa's family is no longer with him. Issa and his colleagues at Youth Against Settlement, they have been detained a number of times. They've all been raped. They've all been sexually violated. This is what the Israelis do as a matter of course. And this is how they are breaking people and what they choose to do to try and break the resistance. Now, there's an argument made that it's ultimately futile. I mean, if people want an example of that, I'd suggest go watch the film Battle of Algiers, right? That is a terrific, it's a film that documents essentially the French experience in Algeria and how that type of individual pressure will not have an effect on the overall struggle for national liberation. But when you know these people, when you've been with them, when you've eaten their food, stayed in their homes, behind the wall next to my Julian Assange poster is a photo from Hebron with Issa, where we are being gassed by the Israeli border police. So there is an aspect of this where you say, yes, they cannot break the resistance. They cannot break the spirit. They cannot break the desire for liberation. And that's absolutely true. And what we see that in movements throughout history. One of the things I cut out of my slideshow was if you go to Ramallah, there's a giant statue of Nelson Mandela there. It's beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, right? And the South African struggle, which Mandela, of course, spoke of as being intertwined with the Palestinian struggle. And the idea of the resistance to occupation not being diminished. And certainly when we talk about the ceasefire, we could talk about this. Certainly if you saw the reactions from the Palestinians in Gaza, including especially from Hamas, the statements that they put out, they viewed these 15, 16 months, this ceasefire as being a victory for them, despite the horror, despite the entire destruction of their land, the systematic ruination of their society, the deaths of, we have no idea how many. The official number is what, 47,000. The Lancet, the medical journal out of Britain, just the other day said, a week or two ago, said it's at least a 40% undercount. We've had other statistics, other people say it's at least 100, 200, 300,000. When I was there in the West Bank, this was November, the Palestinians I spoke with, they believed it was somewhere between 100 and 200,000 dead in Gaza at that point. And you have this spirit, though, right? This desire for liberation, this desire for freedom that allows the Palestinians to say, after all this, that we're victorious, right? So there's that, but then it's also coupled with the individuals, and particularly when you know them and to know what they've been through, what they struggle through. And so, like I said, the Israeli assault, the preparation for the annexation, as it picks up steam, we are going to see more and more stories of people that we know either personally or we know because we've seen them in documentaries or read their writings or whatnot, or follow them on Instagram, who will be targeted and either will be put in. What I was explained to me, why is Issa not in prison? You know, why come? Because the Israelis aren't going to do anything they know won't have an effect. So they put Issa in prison. It's not going to have an effect on him. It didn't have an effect on him. They raped him and his colleagues. Didn't have the effect they were looking for. So you can know what do you think the next thing's going to be, right? And I think those of us who are in solidarity here in the United States have to speak about this openly. We have to. We cannot give a scintilla of false hope. We cannot speak about this in a way that makes us feel better or doesn't make us feel so sad or make us we have to have an optimistic side. You know, when I was in college, the year before I graduated, Ted Koppel came and did the commencement address. And Koppel's commencement address was about pessimism. And he started off by saying, you know, if you were a Jew in Europe in 33, 34, 35, and you were pessimistic, you got out. And that meant your family survived. But if you're optimistic, if you kept the idea about hope and everything else, you and your family very likely exterminated. And so I think it's important for us, and this is one of the reasons why I want to talk about the people, because we have to remain true to what's happening there. And we have to not give false hope. And by saying that, it doesn't mean that we give up. It doesn't mean that we surrender. It doesn't mean that we do anything other than redouble our efforts, right? Because there is no alternative to supporting the Palestinian people. But we have to be clear about what's happening and what's coming. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And this here is the last slide. Hassan Abu Nasser. This was in Ramallah. His family's in Gaza. Well, his family's early in November, an Israeli airstrike killed 130 members of his family in one airstrike. And we've seen that over and over again. Entire bloodlines, entire families destroyed, removed from existence. And so that's the reality of what we're seeing here. That's the final aspect, along with the detentions, the demolitions. It's the deaths. That's what the Israelis use in their occupation to terrorize the people, to try and subjugate the people, right? To try and put down Palestinian resistance, to put down the desire for national liberation. And you see this, you know, and in the West Bank, we went over the numbers for Gaza. In the West Bank, since October 7th, you've seen about 850 Palestinians killed by the Israelis, almost all of them by the Israeli army. I know we hear a lot about the settlers, and the settlers have conducted thousands of attacks throughout the last year on the Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, but their violence doesn't compare at all to the Israeli army's violence. So in November, 21 Palestinians have been killed by settlers. And at that point, nearly 800 have been killed, or 770 or something like that, have been killed by the Israeli army, all with American supplied rifles, right? Or mostly American supplied rifles. They have some of their own type of rifle there too. You know, so, you know, you look at that. The other side of it too is the collaboration. You can't have occupation without collaboration. And so I'm not entirely sure of the numbers right now, but again, 21 Palestinians have been killed by settlers in November. As of last week, 25 Palestinians have been killed by the Palestinian Authority. So it's very possible that the Palestinian Authority has killed more Palestinians than settlers have. But again, nothing compares to the violence being done by the Israeli army and their willingness to utilize that violence. That, of course, is what we'll see more of in the West Bank going forward. Oh, I'm sorry. I did keep the Nelson Mandela statue in. That's in Ramallah. Certainly, people who are not familiar with what Mandela said about the Palestinians, please, you know, when we're done here, Google it. Okay, and this is the last slide here. And so I know that was not hopeful. That was not optimistic. That was sincere, though. And there are ways to help. And one of the things that you see with the Palestinians is this feeling of isolation, right? And this feeling of, in some ways, betrayal. No one is going to come to help them. The friends they thought that would come to help them, Hezbollah, right, agreed to a ceasefire with the Israelis. The Iranians haven't done what they said they would do. The only guys really supporting us are the Yemenis, right? And so the need for solidarity is great. And so these are organizations that run solidarity missions in Palestine. Feel free, please take a screenshot. You can. I'll put my email address in the chat if people want to contact me about this. These are different groups that do different missions. Some of them are protective missions, which are quite dangerous, as well as other groups like the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, or Sabeel, which is the organization I went with, which I recommend. Which I couldn't recommend anymore. I mean, it's a fantastic organization. They do more educational type of delegations, but there still is a risk there. There still is a danger. Certainly, the way the Israelis respond to internationals um, now compared to when I was there 7 years ago, it's night and day. And the American passport is not going to protect you. Um, and we saw that with the young American woman who was killed on a protection mission, Eisenhower who the Israelis shot in the head and murdered over the summer. So certainly there are opportunities to go there to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. If people are interested, I'm happy to talk to you about that. If you're able to go, it is, even for a week or however long, it is worthwhile for you, the experience, but for the Palestinian people, it really does mean everything. One thing that occurred over and over again, everyone you met, the gratitude for us being there. And because that's what they need to sustain themselves. They need that support. They need that solidarity, right? They need to know that people know what's going on and people care, because they're up against, and they say it. They'll say things. Look, we've survived 20 empires. We'll survive a 21st empire. That type of bravado. But the reality is that they need people to stand there with them. And so, please, happy to talk about these things offline with anybody. Okay. Okay. Now, Mark, you wanted me to talk about ceasefire and so essentially, with the ceasefire, um, it is, I'm not sure who you can look at in that ceasefire deal who is sincere, right? Who can you look at with the Israelis, the Biden administration, the Trump administration, and actually believe what they're saying? Certainly, I believe Hamas is sincere about it because, again, they describe it as a victory. And you can't imagine them getting a better deal than this deal. And for people who are unfamiliar what the deal is, essentially it is the first phase is 42 days long. It will begin on Sunday with the release of 3 Israeli hostages. The hostages, there are approximately 100 hostages. It's unknown how many are actually still alive, but this deal the first phase of this deal would release 33 hostages over the period of the 6 weeks. This would be in exchange for 1,000 Palestinian hostages released. So for every Israeli released, 30 Palestinians or so are released. It would those who are be released are the 2 children that are there. I believe there are 5 women, 3 of which are Israeli soldiers, and then the rest are men who are either sick or who are over the age of 50. The deal also calls for the Israeli army to pull out of the populated areas of Gaza, to dismantle all their fortifications, all their or their outposts, all the things they've built, to remove themselves from the Philadelphia corridor, which is the land that's between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. And that would be over a period, again, of 6 weeks, that would lead into a second phase where you would see the remainder of the hostages exchanged as well then, although not certainly all the Palestinian hostages. Again, there may be as many as 21,000. But you'd see in the second phase as well then too, the lead into a third phase that would be a permanent ceasefire. So the second phase would require negotiations towards a permanent ceasefire, and that third phase would then see a repatriation of bodies and the beginning of a new governance structure in Gaza, as well as reconstruction. Now, the thing about this is that the Israelis have made it clear, and same with the Trump administration has made it clear as well, they don't care about phases 2 and 3. They just want to get the bulk of the hostages back and then begin the war again. So you look at this in the terms of the sincerity of it. Certainly, there's Israeli political aspects here, domestic political aspects here, that the U.S. doesn't have leverage over, in a sense of their far right, particularly their ministers of finance and security, who are settlers who will not vote for this. And if they leave the government, Netanyahu's government can't stand. Now, we're not sure if they will leave the government or not. They may leave the cabinet, but that doesn't mean that they'll leave the government, which would cause elections to have to reoccur. There's a lot of dust. It's very hazy. The Israeli cabinet is scheduled to vote on this tomorrow, on Friday, and we'll see. I mean, and there are other aspects too about, is this all just one stunt? Is this just a political stunt? Is this, as Chris Hedges today called it, a presidential inauguration bombing pause? And as soon as Donald Trump, because we've seen Trump for the last months campaign, his whole campaign talked about getting this done on day one, ending the Ukraine war on day one. They talk about Greenland and Panama. You know, it's clear that Donald Trump wants to have a quick foreign policy victory up front. And so if he can stand at the Capitol on Monday and said the Israeli hostages are being released because of me, I ended this war, and then a week later they go back to killing Palestinians, well, they're always going to blame it on Hamas. They're always going to blame it on Palestinians. That's what this administration did. I mean, and we've seen also too, just since the Israeli negotiating team. So the sequence of this was that on Sunday, the Qataris said, we've got a deal. And then Monday, the Palestinians agreed to it and publicly agreed to it. And then just yesterday, Wednesday, the Israeli negotiating team said, yes, this is good. We'll take it back to our bosses. And I think a lot of people got ahead of themselves, thinking when it was reported that the Israelis accepted a deal, it wasn't understood that it was the Israeli negotiating team that accepted the deal, and they still had to go back to their bosses in Tel Aviv. And then, of course, this crisis that's occurred in the last day, where are the Israelis going to sign on to it or not? And then we'll see, of course, what the Israeli cabinet does tomorrow. I would think that they will sign on to it to give Trump what he wants. And then after that, it's open for them to violate it at will, just as they violated the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon 1,000 times probably, and that's not hyperbole, that they violated it that many times. So, you know, the reality is, though, I think, whether or not there's a ceasefire deal, and even say there's a ceasefire deal that holds, although I'd be shocked, because I left out one of the key factors of the ceasefire deal, is the Palestinians get to return home, including 1 million people back to the north. And so for the last several months, the Israelis have really focused on the northern part of Gaza. This is where they carried out the general's plan, the surrender or starve campaign. And they have ethnically cleansed most of northern Gaza in the last weeks, as they've cleansed Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia, and moved into Gaza. They begun to move into Gaza City to cleanse Gaza City. And the estimates are 100, 200,000 people left in the northern part of Gaza. What they built was a massive corridor that cut off northern Gaza from central and southern Gaza. It's called the Netzarim corridor. Now, this is where people, you may have seen the stories coming out of the Israeli media about how this is a free fire zone. Any Palestinian who came close to it, they just murdered. The whole thing has been one giant murder anyway. But the idea being is that Israel would dismantle all that, and the Palestinians would be able to go back to the north. I find that really difficult to believe the Israelis would accept that. They've worked this hard to cleanse the north. Their settler class is committed to moving in there. The day that we went down on the Gaza border, as I mentioned, the day we were there, Daniela Weiss, who was one of the most prominent settlers in Israel, was there as well. Not where we were, thank God, but she was given a press conference, somewhere else, right at the border there, and she had brought with her 40 trailers or 40 caravans, and saying we will be in Gaza within the year. And then the following week, she said, I've got a list of 750 families ready to go in, and all the statements from the Israelis, certainly their posture towards this, that looked as if this was what was going to happen to Gaza, was that they would continue the ethnic cleansing of the north. Whoever's left up there would basically be put in concentration camps, and then the Israeli settlers would come in. And then south of the Netzarim corridor, the Israelis didn't seem to have a plan, and that they're happy having those people penned down there, and that they would continue to starve them, immiserate them, and murder them as they saw fit. This ceasefire plan obviously does not follow my line of thought on what would happen, but I also don't believe the ceasefire is either going to go through or it's going to hold. And this gets to the whole idea why the Israelis at this point, I don't think, care too much about Gaza. And maybe this is why they might commit to a ceasefire, because they see Hamas as degraded enough, the Palestinian people in Gaza as immiserated and destroyed enough not to be a bother. And what's this all been about? And even during the last 15, 16 months, it's always been about the West Bank. Gaza, God help me for saying this, but Gaza, to me, has been nothing more than a supporting effort to shape the conditions for the annexation of the West Bank. Same as their campaigns in Lebanon, same as what we saw happen with Syria, same as what we saw with the Iranians. This idea that the West Bank has always been their main effort. It's always been their primary desire. And so as they set the conditions to allow for to prepare to conduct this annexation, they have to make sure that they don't have pressure in any other places. In this way, with a degraded Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, people suffering in Gaza, with Hezbollah essentially taken off the battlefield in Lebanon, and we'll see what happens in the next 2 weeks when that ceasefire expires. But a lot of things I'm reading is that Hezbollah really was shaken in the last in the campaign in the fall. They did a magnificent job, Hezbollah, on the ground defeating the Israeli army in southern Lebanon. But the decapitation, the strikes on their logistics, as well as just the direct murder of thousands of Lebanese civilians, shook them. Certainly the loss of Assad and his government in Syria, the fact that Iran is essentially checked in many ways, that the two of them fire ballistic missiles at each other. They both realize that there's nothing they can do about removing each other's government. So any further escalation is going to mean you're bombing each other's cities. And they don't, so certainly the Israelis have different views on that. And there are Israelis who do want to see an attack on Iran, but they want the Americans to take the bulk of that, again, so that they can concentrate on the West Bank. And you can see other ways that they're preparing for the annexation as well. And I'll wrap this up here because I know we're getting close to only having a half hour left. The Israelis recently said they're going to stand up 5 new reserve brigades. And these reserve brigades are going to be for essentially old men and old women, 38 to 58 years old. I'm 51 years old. I could be a part of these reserve brigades, And the idea being is that you need manpower, right? And that you don't want the young men and women, the young soldiers, standing a post, running a checkpoint, driving a truck, doing those sorts of things when they need to be out on the streets, right? Kicking in doors in the West Bank, shooting children, doing what the Israeli army will be doing there as they move forward with the annexation. I believe the way the annexation will occur will be over a 2 or 3 year period. Parts of the West Bank, the rural parts, areas C, as they're called, the smaller towns and villages, I think they will face ethnic cleansing, similar to what we've seen in the last 80, 90 years, whether it was in the Nakba or the Nazca. And then the cities will essentially be isolated, left to kind of wither on the vine. And then, of course, some areas like the Jenin refugee camp, maybe Nablus, areas where there's always been traditional resistance, strong resistance, the Israelis will make an example out of. 15 Israeli settler leaders in the West Bank put out a letter a week or two ago saying this is essentially what has to happen to these cities. You have to do to Jenin, you have to do to Nablus what you did to Khan Yunis, what you did to Rafah, what you did to Gaza City. So the desire is there, and I think the desire as well to just carry out violence for violence sake against the other, certainly, of course, is a foundation of this genocide. And so you can see how they'd be carried into the West Bank. And I'll leave it there because I know I went much longer with that slideshow than I intended to.
Matt, thank you for that sharing from your experience, and then really quite emotionally affecting story about the Palestinians. And I was quite moved by what you said about the persistence of Samud, but at the same time, the need not to offer false hope and to be really clear about the number of people that have been broken by the cruelties of the Israelis. I know also a lot of commentators, even 3 months ago, were talking about the axis of resistance as a potential counterweight to the Israelis, and it does seem now as though that too has been severely degraded. Not just Hamas, but Hezbollah. Maybe the Yemenis are going to continue, but it's a really different situation, and you described that very clearly. Friends, I want to, there are a lot of us on the call, and a lot of people would really like to talk with Matt, and I want to allow all the possible time for that. So I've just switched over to gallery, and I can see a lot of you here. Let me ask you to raise your hand if you have a question for Matt, and when I call on you, you can unmute and then ask Matt directly. I've got 3 screens to look at, so be patient with me if I don't call on you right away. We do want to allow as much conversation as possible. So let me open the floor to whoever would like to ask Matt a question or engage him in some way. Look at this first screen and see if there are any, and then switching to the second screen. The third, let me come back. Yes, I see you're identified as user there. Unmute and please identify yourself as you talk with Matt. I see you on the first screen, sir, with your headphones in. If you'll unmute, please go ahead. Can you hear us? Can you unmute?
We go. Yeah.
There you
Okay.
go.
Yeah.
Please.
Name is Roland Russell. I'm a retired pastor. I've been to Israel, but it was in the 1980s. The experience that Matt describes is just horrifying. But I've met some of the people and worked with the Middle East Council of Churches who directed our trip there, and that was through the World Council of Churches.
Yeah.
But we have an interested group of about 20 people in my congregation who are just horrified at what's going on, but at loggerheads to know what in the world we can do besides try to support I think the one thing we started doing was sending support to the peacemaking groups that are composed of both Israeli and Palestinian people in Israel, Palestine. But what do you suggest?
I think that's thank you. I think that's a lot of it is just providing that direct support to groups that are working there, whether it's international groups or Palestinian groups, finding those connections and building a tight relationship where they know who you are, right? And you've built that type of communication, you've built that type of trust that they feel that you are not going to abandon them and that you are with them in this come what may. And then, of course, there are a number of NGOs out there, whether it's all the way up from, UNRWA. We went and one of the visits we made was to meet with one of the senior folks at UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Administration. That's the main UN body that provides support for the Palestinian people. And that, of course, support is in very much a danger as the Israelis are coming closer to their deadline of pulling support for UNRWA. Which is going to be a really big issue. For people who are not familiar with that, what the Israelis said they're going to do is we're no longer going to support UNRWA. We can't kick you out, right, because you're under a UN mandate, but we don't have to support you, which means that, and not more than that, they forbid any Israeli organization, business, government, whatever, from working with UNRWA. So that means that even getting laundry done, right, that means banking. But that also means, too, that going out in the West Bank and other places, wherever they're going to go, they can't coordinate with the Israeli army, right? So there is no protection them from the settlers or even from the Israeli army themselves. So, there's groups like that. But I think the main thing I would say is that, continue to work with those peacemaking teams, particularly if you already have a good relationship with them, and then build on that. Right. I mean, because I think the most important thing is having some type of connection that is real and that's sound and that provides for some degree of support, not just materially, because certainly that's what's needed, but also to, spiritually, emotionally, morally, that kind of thing.
Let me just
Okay.
add to what you said there, Matt. Roland, Voices for Justice in Palestine recommends UNRWA and the Middle East Children's Alliance, which does a lot of very valuable water works in Gaza, and also the Palestinian American Medical Association,
Yeah.
which sponsors surgeons from this country and other parts of the world to go to Gaza. Those are three, and also supporting Sabeel and the community peacemaker teams. These are all great organizations, as well as the ones that Matt listed in his slides there. So please contact us and contact Matt directly. We can get you all that information for continued work.
Right. And I would
Right.
say, particular as a faith-based organization, Sabeel
Yeah.
I would strongly recommend that you contact Sabeel and either send individuals over or send a delegation over. And through that experience, you'll start to make relationships there on the ground, as well as having people who have been there, as Mark said earlier, come and see, go and tell.
Thank
All
you.
right. I see several hands up. Let me start at the upper left there, Laura, and then I see Joe Cicero and Alan Smith. Let's go in that order. So Laura, then Joe, then Alan, and we'll keep going. Go ahead,
Okay,
Laura.
so Matt, one thing I'm wondering is with their desire to annex the West Bank and everything they're doing in Gaza, do you think they still have a hope that they can force Egypt, the US can force Egypt or Jordan to accept all these people? Or what are they, I mean, if they're going to annex all this land, so where's everybody going to go?
Right. It's good to see you, Laura. Yeah, no, they do. That's all they have is this kind of hope, ridiculous hope that Jordan or Egypt will eventually let them in. I think there may have been some speculation that with Assad's government gone in Syria, HTS now in charge, that some deal could be made that they would allow Palestinians into Syria at some point in the future. There's this kind of, it's been floating out there because remember the pier the United States Department of Defense built in Gaza, that I don't even have the right words to describe it, but yeah,
Boondoggle. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it would have, horror, but like that idea came from Netanyahu, supposedly from the Israelis themselves. And the idea being, of course, you could bring stuff in and you could get people out. So there's this fantasy that ocean liners are going to show up and take the Palestinians to Madagascar or to Peru or someplace, they really don't. One of the things we saw a couple weeks ago that was quite alarming was on Israeli television discussions about Egypt and about Egypt violating the peace and ceasefire agreements with Israel. That the Egyptians were conducting operations in the Sinai that were dangerous to Israel, and Israel may have to act. The Israeli also, too, are now talking about the Knesset is forming a committee to prepare for war with Turkey in the future. Right. So the idea being, of course, is that what you're dealing with here with Israel is the idea of greater Israel, right? The idea of the fulfillment of the Zionist ambition. And you'll see this. You'll see it with Israeli soldiers who have patches on their shoulders that don't say from the river to the sea. It says from the Nile to the Euphrates, right? Because greater Israel to many means from the land of Moses to the land of Abraham, right? So from the Nile to the Euphrates. And so certainly the idea a year ago, I would have told you were crazy if quite possibly the Israelis would go to war with Egypt to retake the Sinai. Now, no, I don't think it's likely, but is it possible? Is it something I'm going to scratch off my sheet as something that's impossible? No, it's not. I mean, so this is not over. One of the things I think that I've spoken of, or kind of with what's happening in Gaza, and again, God forgive me for referencing Gaza in this way, but that it is a prelude. It is an opening chapter, right? And that what is to come may be the main affair. We just don't know. It's like Yogi Berra said, right? Yogi Berra said, predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future. So what's to come? But we see that this continues to build out, right? And again, if you look at the ceasefire as, even if the ceasefire goes through, if the ceasefire holds and the Israelis don't renege, they don't violate it, everything else, well, what does that do then, essentially? That allows them to shift their focus and shift their forces to the West Bank, right? I mean, so yeah, there's so many ugly aspects of this about where it can go. But in terms of what happens to the Palestinian people in Gaza, I don't think the Israelis had a plan. And I think really they were content just to let them be immiserated, starved, and murdered off in the central and southern parts. And this is why I think that if the ceasefire deal doesn't hold, in a year from now, our news is essentially going to be the same as it was last year, right? That the same stories. Only 25 trucks got in. Another baby froze to death. 85 people were killed by bombs. So I think that's where we're at with it. You're muted, Mark.
Thank you. Joe Cicero, you're up next.
Matthew, thank you very much for tonight's presentation. Let me see, just thinking along the lines of what can we do? And I just want to remind everybody that every federal representative in the U.S., our two North Carolina U.S. senators, and all of our House members voted for more weapons for Israel all along. And so a year ago, we were pushing for even to members of Congress to say the words ceasefire, and that was an uphill battle all along. So but at this point, I don't know, any observations? Well, North Carolina, our congressional districts are now changed. We have three of the biggest Democratic districts, I think, in the country. With Alma Adams, with Deborah Ross, and Fouché. Pronounce her name correctly one of these days. So on one hand, you would think that potentially Democrats would have more power to allow these Democratic representatives with districts that are more Democratic than AOC, than the Squad. Some of the biggest Democratic districts in the country. So do you think that would enable us to put additional pressure on them to do what's right, to vote, against more weapons and against upcoming policy that like you just described?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I don't think so. I think the Democrats this last year certainly made it clear. You just had the poll put out by Institute for Middle East Understanding, IMEU, that showed that almost a third, 29% of Democratic voters who didn't vote list Gaza as the top reason for not doing so. The polls were there over the summer and early fall that if Harris had changed her position, had been harder on Israel, she would have received many more votes than if she continued on her, right? I mean, so essentially you had the Democratic Party saying we'd rather lose this race than anger the Israeli lobby. In 2022, AIPAC in particular, and Democratic Majority for Israel, launched very serious efforts in Democratic primaries. And I think they were involved in 12, and they won all of them except for one, Summer Lee up in Pennsylvania. But two of them were here in North Carolina. One was in the first and one was in the fourth. So Nita Alam was defeated by Valerie Fouché in the fourth, and Erica Adams was defeated by Don Davis in the first. And millions of dollars of Israeli lobby money came in those primaries and had a very significant role. So I think even with the idea that we can frame this for the Democrats as this is as against an anti-Trump thing, right? I don't think that the power of the lobby, their willingness to put that money into primaries and how it can swing it, will is going to be something that we can overcome in the next election cycle or two or three. I mean, we have to come up with something, of course. We can't just accept it. But in the meantime, until we build some type of infrastructure, some type of alternative, some way to put leverage on them to get them to do the right thing on this, I'm at a loss for this next election cycle because that money is incredibly powerful. And that's essentially what we have. We have a system of legalized bribery. And yeah, I mean, this is what we're dealing with. This is what we're up against. But certainly, I think that does not mean we don't do anything about it, and that doesn't mean we stop petitioning them and protesting them, making our views known, building efforts. I mean, certainly the Biden administration doesn't speak about ceasefire. The Biden administration doesn't use the word ceasefire until March of last year. And what was occurring in March and last year? You had the uncommitted movement, right? And they were doing, I mean, getting all the, lots and lots of voters in the primaries to vote uncommitted. And that shook up the Biden campaign. And so then they started talking about a ceasefire, right? And even then we saw that the White House put forward the ceasefire agreement we're talking about now. That was put forward by the White House at the end of May, and Hamas accepted it in July 2nd, and of course the Israelis refused to accept it. But so you saw that where there was an effort by the White House, how honest they were about it, how enthusiastic they were about it, I doubt, but they did put it there because they were feeling some political pressure. Now, by the time that the convention came, they couldn't care less anymore. They felt they had decided on their path. And again, they would rather essentially lose the election than anger the Israeli lobby. And so here we are now. As the 26th cycle begins, we'll see essentially this come to play. This keeping people in line, and it's not, this is our system. This is a problem we have because the Israeli lobby is nothing special. This is what Wall Street does. This is what the military industrial complex does. This is what pharma does. This is what big ag does, right? I mean, this is our system of legalized bribery, and these are the consequences of it.
Right.
Okay,
Thanks.
let's yeah. Betsy, I did not see your hand up until Jerry Marketos pointed out that it's sort of lost in your curtain there. So sorry for overlooking you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Matt. Great talk. Great to see you again. One of my questions was answered about what do those pessimists do? Where do they go if they're pessimists? But the other one was, I heard you say that the Palestinian Authority is killing Palestinians. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And why is that?
Yeah, first of all, it's good to see you, Betsy. It's been way too long.
Yeah.
So what you essentially have is you have the Palestinian Authority, which was meant to be the temporary governing power within Palestine under the Oslo process 30 some odd years ago, and you still have that. They are realizing what's coming. The annexation is coming, and they need to make sure that the Israelis keep them in the place that they're at. So the idea being is that we've had up in the Jenin refugee camp is the Palestinian Authority has gone in there. This is one example, has gone in there in force, and they've been fighting with the armed Palestinian resistance in Jenin for more than a month now, at least. And the idea being is to try and show the Israelis that you don't need to do this. So it's in some way it's a form of harm reduction. Some way it's a form of damage control. It's to make sure that Israelis understand that you can rely on us. It'd be kind of similar to the VC French militias going after the French resistance, right, in order to please the occupying Germans. It's that type of, you're always going to have collaborators, right? I mean, you're always going to have, hey, you had Native American tribes that sided with the American government. You're always going to have that. And so that's what you're seeing here. And I think some of it is the jockeying as the annexation is getting nearer, the jockeying to be relevant, the jockeying to seem loyal, the jockeying to be necessary, right? They're going to need people to administer the West Bank. Look, we can do it. We went into Jenin and we shot those guys dead. You don't need to do that. We can do that. Some of it also too is, like I said, is harm reduction, trying to keep the Israeli army from doing it themselves, because when they know the Israeli army comes in, it's going to be really bad. And so there's some of that as well. But I think that's a lot of it. One of the things that was interesting is I asked a number of people there, what's happening with Mahmoud Abbas, right? Because Abbas, he's been in power since Arafat died. I mean, and he's getting up there. I think he's 88 or so. So he's not going to be around forever. What happens when and I got different answers from all kinds of different people. But the overall thing was that essentially that they'd say about the replacement for Abbas, it's going to be up to the Israelis. At the end of the day, it's up to the Israelis. And I think that's what you're seeing here in many ways with the collaboration, and particularly highlighted by the PA in Jenin, is this desire to be relevant, to be necessary, and to be seen as dependable.
Okay, thanks. One other quick question. I think it's going to be quick, and that is that isn't it true that there was some reluctance on the part of Hamas to sign the peace agreement?
No, not that anyone has seen.
From the beginning. Well, let me finish. Well, we kept hearing on the news that they wanted a permanent ceasefire, that they were not signing the peace agreement because they wanted it to be a permanent ceasefire, not a temporary one.
Right, and so that's been a thing for them throughout. So Hamas makes the first known, and we know this from the Israeli media, the first known attempts by Hamas to negotiate are actually on October 8th. And they offer to send back all the civilian hostages if the Israeli military does not start destroying Gaza. And that's so right away there's that because Hamas takes these hostages, the PIJ takes the hostages, random people take hostages, and it wasn't supposed to be like that. It's supposed to have just been an operation to take military hostages, and that doesn't go that way. Of course, the horror show of October 7th happens, and then you've had this process of essentially the Israelis, in particular Netanyahu, and we know this again. It's the Israeli press has been saying this throughout the last year. American press hasn't been saying it at all, but the Israeli press sure has. And again, the conversation on Democracy Now! This morning was really good about this point, about the lying that's gone on about it. And the reality is that Hamas has been willing to negotiate. Again, they accepted the deal on July 2nd, and then the Israelis changed they changed the parts of the deal, including we're willing to go back in and kill whenever we want. And that's one of the issues here with this current ceasefire is you've essentially heard from the Trump administration already that they're fine with Israel going back in and finishing the job whenever they feel they need to. And the Israelis themselves saying, that this is not going to be permanent. I mean, statements from Prime Minister's office in the last day saying this is not going to be permanent. And so this is the thing, is that the desire to have a permanent ceasefire, a removal of the Israeli military, and this is what essentially this ceasefire deal says. And this is why the Palestinians in Gaza are declaring it a victory, because the Israelis didn't get what they want. They didn't get the defeat of the Palestinian people. They didn't get the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. They didn't get reoccupation. They didn't get settlement. Right. So they see, even though it's a complete disaster and tragedy for the Palestinian people in Gaza, complete ruination of the whole society there, they're still viewing it as a victory. But this idea of permanent ceasefire has been, of course, the thing that has always been on the negotiating, presented as a negotiating table by the Palestinians, throughout the last 15, 16 months.
That's what I thought.
Friends,
Okay.
let me look at I have 5 minutes left if we end at our appointed time. So let me try to get 2 more questions. And Matt, let me ask, you're a fountain of information, but shorter responses, please, for these last couple minutes. Alan Smith, and then Ted and Sharon Shofi. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It's good to see you, and thank you for a really important presentation. I'm going to forego the question I was going to ask. You mentioned something that triggered a thought. I'll share that, and then I'll just move on. But Ralph Nader mentioned about 6 months or a year ago that if you could get 500 people in a congressional district to sign a petition about one particular issue, it would trigger a town hall. I called someone at Deborah Ross's office and talked with them about it, and they said there's some truth to that. So I'm going to email you about that, and maybe we can give that a go. But thank you.
All right, thanks, Alan.
Okay, Ted and Sharon.
Yes, I really appreciate what has been said so far. One thing I'm particularly interested in is Samud, which, as I understand it, in a way, even though it is an Arabic word, was coined almost in its meaning of perseverance for the Palestinians. And I thought to myself, well, maybe Samud is what faith is supposed to be like, as we understand faith. And then if you go to Hebrews 11, you begin to see those people, I think, operating with Samud. And the one last thing I wanted to say about it as a clue is one thing's really impressive is that it is catching all the way to the little children, all the way to the little children. Because if you watch Al Jazeera English as we do, you'll see the horrible things going on, people being wiped out right and left, no food, nothing. And yet, very, very often, you see the V sign for victory from a little child.
Right.
So there's something about it that I want us to get. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, and just real quick, Ted, I think one of this aspect of steadfastness for us is we're doing it for others, right? It's not about us personally. This is not about an internal aspect of Samud that I have to persevere. It's that we have to persevere for others, for those we love, for those who are in our community, for those we care about because of issues of justice, right? And so I think that's why we stay engaged.
Great. Let's take one last one. Chris, I've seen your hand. Please go ahead briefly. You're muted.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Paul, it was kind of a just a note about legal possibilities. You know, I did see that they were trying to sue the State Department, of course, for continuing funding despite the evidence, of the withholding of aid and all that stuff. And I also saw this. I'll post it in the chat. There's also a news article that in California, taxpayers are doing a class action lawsuit against the Congress, against their Congress members. So I think that seems very encouraging, and I'm wondering if that's like possible in other states, maybe North Carolina's too. But just throwing that out there. I know it's a long thing, but it's just at the very end. But thanks so much.
I know it's coming to the end, but I'm one of the signers of the Taxpayers Against Gaza. And we now have, I just want to let people know really quickly, we're going to do a webinar on the 25th of this month, because over 500 contacts have been made with people wanting to know, how did we do it?
Right.
So just go to Taxpayers Against Gaza, California, and the address for that to sign up for that webinar should be available there.
Thank you, Pamela, for doing that. I was going to say, I thought I had seen something in my inbox about that, but thank you, Pamela.
That's great. Friends, I think I'm going to go ahead and say that we've come toward the end. I do want to announce that the second webinar in our series is February 13th, and this one is called The Other Side of the Wall, West Bank Stories of Colonization and Samud. This is with Beth Brockman, a Durham-based activist, and also Ron Shive, who's the main representative for Churches for Middle East Peace in the Carolinas. Both of them recently went to the West Bank also with Sabeel, and they have very similar stories to share based on the things that we've heard from Matt. So look in your inboxes for the flyer, which is due to come out next week. And again, save the date, February 13th, 7 to 8:30, more along these same lines. I just want to say, Matt, thank you so much. Wow, it was really a great presentation. Let's give everybody, show Matt our appreciation for the great work that you've been doing. Sorry to cut you short there. We could listen to you all night, and there's so much good insight, and we're grateful for Sabeel's work in helping to shape your conscience and shaping ours as well. Thank you so much.
Kate is raising her hand. What do you want to add, Kate?
I just wanted to ask if Matt is open to having people reach out to him for questions they might have after this, if they did ask. And Matt, if you just want to redirect them somewhere else or whatever you think. We could field them for you, but I thought I'd throw that to you to see if
Oh, yeah. No, thanks, Kate. Yeah, absolutely. You can get a hold of me via Twitter or X or Instagram, direct message that way, or you can email me directly. And my email is matthew.ho, so matthew.hoh@icloud.com. And happy to speak to people about any of this.
All right. Burhan, any final words? You're muted.
Yeah, now I am unmuted. I wanted to thank everybody. This is great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. And sorry, some of the people who raised their hands did not get to ask their questions. But please follow us and ask Matt to his email, and I'm sure he will answer the questions. But it's very well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. Thanks for participating. And thanks one last time, Matt, for your great presentation.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending. I appreciate it. And thank you, Mark and Kate and Burhan.
thanks, Matt.